Two Amazon procurement nerds are back. We are actually recording Tuesday, releasing the episode tomorrow. We did not do our normal Sunday weekend recording. And lots has been happening in the world of AI and in procurement, Dr. Eloise. So today is the hodgepodge episode. We're just gonna, all things random. We're just gonna kind of bounce back and forth and talk about what's going on in the world. You were in Brazil. Let's start off by maybe having you do a quick recap. And I would personally like to hear about your trip.
Awesome. I would love to talk about it. Viva Brazil. I had so much fun there. I had been once before, but only for like 36 hours, and this was so much fun. Sao Paulo is a vibe. It's a total great city. The food was amazing. The people were just lovely. I mean, beyond lovely. And very, very rarely do you go to another country and just everybody is just happy and friendly and willing to help you uh and and I just had a great time. If you happen to be there, the W Hotel is amazing. And I was there to do a book talk, and I was there to do a book talk and Linkana, the startup based in Brazil, there brought me there along with Carney that co-sponsored it. And I met tons of people, tons of very passionate procurement people. And that was, I just assumed that everybody loves procurement, but you never really know. And then you go to a completely different country that speaks a different language, and all of a sudden you have people that are passionate about procurement. It was amazing. Um, and
So I don't know a lot of procurement folks in Brazil. A lot of the conferences and networking that I have done in procurement has been more US based. What would you say are kind of the one or two big differences between procurement in Brazil versus the US? I'm always curious about that because sometimes there's some pretty stark differences in different countries.
I'm going to go more broadly. I don't know the market as well, but what I will say is there are some unique challenges in Latin America, especially Brazil, where the government, like all invoices go through the government so they can take their taxes out. And that's from a systems point of view, that's a whole, and I might be butchering some of this, but so I apologize. But so that's a whole different way of dealing with accounting and payments and invoices, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing. The other thing, and again, we in the US have this, we have these big, massive mega corporations here, and they move monolithically slowly. And that's not the case in other regions, certainly not the UK and Europe. In the Middle East is different. And I would say South or Latin America for sure, and Brazil, you sort of see much more. You see big brands that are sort of islands of their own, and they operate with full autonomy. Every company that I've worked with in Brazil, and I haven't gone. I mean, again, I haven't gone there, but they are parts of these big umbrella companies, but when you talk to them, it's like they're their own companies, and in ways that you don't really see in the other regions.
Is procurement as, I don't know if I'm going to say this correctly, is it as mature in Brazil as it is here in the States?
Oh, easily.
Oh.
Now, can I do an assessment and quantify that? No, but I also say that because in the States here, we uh, we tend to be fairly immature, or at least on a spectrum of maturity, and I don't think we get quite that because the ability to be immature in procurement, I think, is a function of the massive profits that U.S. companies make, and so it allows for suboptimal operations, and I just you just can't afford that in other countries. If at a minimum you just don't do procurement on one hand, or you do it real. If you're going to do it, you do it well. None of this middle of the road tepid stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, very interesting. Um,
And I had the greatest experience. So driving from the airport, there's a lot of traffic in Brazil or in Sao Paulo. Um, Driving from the airport to the hotel, it took like an hour and 40 minutes. It was difficult. But I just had but going back to the airport, I took a helicopter, and that was amazing.
talk
That was
about
just,
talk about VIP status.
oh my God, that was like, yes, I mean, I mean, it was a like Uber type service, so it like has 8 seats, so it's not like a private helicopter, but oh my God, you have not lived until you've gone to the airport in a helicopter. But I also want to just shout out to Linkana because they put on an event that is a DPW quality. Just the vibe, the people. They had 55, maybe 60 people on a Wednesday night with traffic in Sao Paulo, and everybody was there and happy to be there. And I took so many pictures with people, and people were taking pictures with themselves and the Linkana folks and the Carney folks. It was just truly phenomenal. So another highlight for this year, I talked about the Spend HQ one, and this was another one. And again, this is like DPW quality event.
Yeah, and I would say we did an episode last year talking about events, and one of my predictions is that we're going to see more micro curated regional events. And I think
Yep.
this kind of goes along those lines of, instead of doing a 3-4 day production, they decided to do a smaller, intimate evening event. And it sounds like that turned out really well for them. So I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, and I also recorded Leo, the founder of Linkana. I did a podcast with him and a guy named Rafa, who's a founder of another company, startup down there, and we did a podcast, which I'll share here, when it gets produced. But we went into a podcast studio, much like you and I did at the beginning, and it was just phenomenal, and makes me want to go back and into the studio with you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for being in person and having a professional kind of running the audio and tech for you.
totally.
So, other big news, Oro bought ProcureTech.
Ay, caramba.
Kind of a mic drop, came out of left field, lots of upset people week.
Yeah, I'm Monday, so I had no prior knowledge, and on Monday I'm trying to like pack and frantically get out of the house to go to Brazil, and I had a call with Lance and Lalita, and Lance of ProcureTech and Lalita, the co-founder of Oro, and they just casually dropped that Oro's acquired ProcureTech, and I don't even think I really processed it at the moment because I'm like, great, okay, and I have to talk a little delicately just because Carney had a relationship with ProcureTech. We obviously no longer have that. But it was a shock, and it's taken me a good week to process it. And I don't think I'm still fully processed, but it's all anybody was talking about last week. I ran into James Mead at the Linkana event, and first thing out of his mouth was asking me about that. And people were texting me and emailing me, and I saw it all over LinkedIn. I think it was one of the biggest sort of shocks to the procurement system that we've seen in a while.
So, a couple of my thoughts on this. I think it's unfortunate for folks that are also in the orchestration space, which is many platforms, because
Yep.
it's kind of the hot thing right now, to really trust and be open to being a part of a platform that's owned by a competitor. No matter what they say, how they're going to handle it, what they're going to do with your data, I think it's very, very challenging that they're no longer a vendor neutral platform. And this raises a larger question of, can you trust any platform that says they're vendor neutral? And then you see something like this happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a call out that I want to make, that I feel for folks that are in this situation now where they're struggling to trust marketplaces or platforms in general.
Well, yeah, and rightly so. I mean, on one hand, I'm going to give a balance, somewhat balance to you. If you're like, if you put all this time and effort to put it into a database and now it's no longer independent, you're kind of like, I got some very like angry folks, and Sean, friend of our show, Sean, the founder of Convergence, he wrote a very public uh, uh, post that highlighted that he was deleting his data. And actually, if you do want your data deleted, it is worth noting they fall under the EU's GDPR. So you can be sure that if you ask for it to be deleted, that they will delete it. Not that I have any questions about Lance's integrity, just that it's just that's what's required. And so and I think it's a legitimate request, because but I think some people had invested thinking that this was an independent platform, an independent service,
Of course.
and they feel betrayed. And I get that. Like I legitimately get that.
I think from Oro's perspective, you could argue that it was a smart strategic play to get them into a new market and
Mhm.
have a built-in group of experts that know the procurement space in markets that um, they're not as present in, and they don't have as many boots on the ground. So you could argue for their end or their part of the deal that it was a smart strategic deal.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, Lance is really well connected, so that makes sense. And I think I saw it this morning. He has a general manager role, so that makes sense. And I mean, ultimately, and I don't know in terms of number of people, but I think the more broadly, it's always a continual drive for good talent. And so if you can pick up
yeah.
5, 10, I think it was 20 people that came over, but like 5, 10, 15, 20 people in a swoop, that actually can help you build out your business. How those folks will, assimilate or not, remains, you never know. But picking up 20 people is not nothing to sneeze at either.
No, and I would also argue, putting my Oro hat on, they're potentially just increased their value to Workday,
Yeah.
which is an investor. So
Yeah.
now you've got, does this make them more interesting for Workday to do some sort of larger acquisition or tuck-in like they did with Scout RFP? So that
Yeah.
could be a more strategic play kind of underlying. And then I want to know, because I'm nosy, what did Lance get from the deal? Like, I'm very curious, what sort of package was it? Heavy stock? Did he get a nice cash, up front? So not that we'll ever know, but I'm curious what his deal looked like.
So I don't know. I even if Lance told me, I'm sure I don't even know if he told me, because I forgot if he told me. But I couldn't even tell you that he did tell me. That's how distracted I was and sort of like stunned. But rumors have been circulating that it's mostly an equity deal. So and I mean, everybody seems to have a comment about so what's in it for Lance. Um, but I think that would track. I don't think that, because you're buying the team, not the assets, because the ProcureTech 100 and the whatever else he had, the accelerators, like those aren't really going to Oro, or like, because that's not really what they're going to do. So so my guess is it's not a big cash thing. And if you're Oro, you don't want to part with that much cash.
Yeah.
You really want incentive. But I don't know for sure. And if I did, I guarantee you I forgot.
All right. So we've got another acquisition in the space. Burrow did an acquisition,
Yes.
which is another interesting play. So maybe give our audience, because I'm not sure how many folks know about this. This probably wasn't as public as the Oro ProcureTech acquisition. Who did Burrow acquire, and what do you think it means for them?
So they acquired a company called Namu, who their thing was sort of advanced negotiations, very much focused on game theory. It'd been a while since I'd looked at them. What I think was interesting about this, there's two things I find interesting about this, is that apparently Namu ran out of cash, and this somebody used the term liquidator. So I think the if that's a thing, I didn't know that was a thing, but the quote unquote, if the liquidator is a real thing, then I think the liquidator is busy right now. Um, but again, Namu was on my spider chart. I liked what they did. I thought it was unique to bring game theory into it. I do think though that it changes again, it's just a reflection of the changes that are coming. I think for Burrow, and I'll connect the two, I think it makes sense because just doing research is about to be disrupted. Maybe not 100%, but certainly the agentic workforce is a big thing, is a big part of that disruption is going to hit some of Burrow's traditional services. So bringing in a Namu, and again, I think there's a lot of people with a lot of really great skills at Namu. The technology is, again, I can't remember what the technology was or wasn't, but certainly you're probably getting really good negotiating people. So it helps Burrow build out. Now, I think there's, again, back to the agentic thing, one of I'm working on my own agentic masterclass, and one of the first use cases is using Gemini Deep Research and Perplexity to do research. And I think that's going to undercut a lot of what SmartCube and Burrow have done for many, many years. Will it eliminate them? Maybe not, but it's certainly it puts a crimp in their style. And I do think that game theory negotiations might become agentified too. So I don't know. I'm a little wait and see on that one, but certainly the people are worth getting, I think.
Yeah, and I think for me, the interesting takeaway was we've been talking a lot about agents on the show and how they're going to take over a lot of the tactical roles and tasks that folks do in procurement. And this acquisition, Burrow is buying an organization that has theory-based AI agents. I mean, they're basically buying an AI agent company.
Yeah.
Where it's going to have these, AI driven, whatever we want to call them, quote, AI people doing and supporting and helping negotiations. So this is, again, goes back to that talk track that we've had around replacing tasks that people do. I mean, here's an example of that through this acquisition.
Yeah, and I think the question that I have is like, well, clearly it's not a standalone business. And so is it really part of a services business? Because I'm not convinced buying 400 agents from 400 procure tech vendors and trying to integrate them into my environment is going to be the winning solution. I don't know what is exactly, but I'm a little leery of when all these vendors are creating agents, because integrating those agents might be a non-starter.
Mhm.
So we'll have to, that remains to be seen. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah. So sticking to the AI theme, Perplexity, which is I would say one of the major, probably top 5 players in AI.
Yep, I would agree.
It is in talks of a raise of up to $1 billion, which, according to TechCrunch and some of the other sites, says that will put them at about an $18 billion valuation.
Just amazing, just stunning. Sorry, I just blown away at those numbers.
Yeah, and I think it goes to a broader question about where VCs putting their money. And when I get my weekly and daily alerts, AI,
Yeah.
Machine learning is kind of everything. It's where all the investment dollars are going. And it's going to become harder and harder to compete with these major AI players who I feel like are just becoming so far ahead of some of the other startups.
And I think, yeah, the way you framed it is perfect because I think that's the problem right now is going to raise for procurement or even AI procurement. I think we're, I think the VCs are less interested in that. And when we talk about the liquidator, quote unquote, I think that's a reflection or just the amount of private equity that has flooded the market because that's really an admission that these businesses are not profitable. So in the procure tech space. So I do think that we have to like the numbers are just staggering. And you look at XAI's numbers, even Meta's holding steady, even though much of their stuff is trash. But it's not because, you know, your aunt and uncle or grandparents are on Facebook. It's because of the AI they're developing to be part of this next generation. And certainly we've talked a lot about Gemini and OpenAI and Anthropic, but boy, howdy, it seems like the funding is concentrating around that center of gravity more so than, hey, I've got Sarah and Eloise have an idea. Let's go get some funding, and it's an AI. I think there's going to be haves, which are all those, and the have-nots.
And the have not list is growing.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a slide now that I use in my presentations, which is the spider map, but it's all grayed out with just one little line or one line to a far the edge of it. And basically the header says, if you're not first, you're last, which is a quote from Talladega Nights. And really what I'm saying there is there's going to be a few that sort of break through. But by the way, I put no logos. I'm not assigning who's going to be on the right side of that line, but everybody else is going to be private equity owned, liquidated, or become small little agents. And I think we are in this moment. And I say all of that to say that even the folks that are on the right side of the line either need to be really tied to or in the shadow of this bigger halves that you just laid out, because that's where all the money's going.
Yeah. So speaking of acquisitions, we're on a roll here with the list. So Google announces agreement to acquire Wiz.
Yep.
Now, I am not, you may have more knowledge than I do. I am not super familiar with Wiz. When you look up some of the press release information and a little bit about it, it says Wiz delivers an easy to use security platform that connects to all other major cloud and code environments to help prevent cybersecurity incidents. So again, now that I'm in the IT world and working with senior leadership, I would say every conversation I have with IT leadership, cybersecurity is in the top 3 list of their biggest concerns or priorities for the year. And I think that's only going to increase with how easy it is for folks to do cyber attacks and leverage AI, right, to get more creative about hacking systems and kind of running scams.
And remember, as I say, till I'm blue in the face, the greatest risk to the enterprise comes through third parties, whether it's tier 1 suppliers, tier X supplier, or N tier suppliers, or NGOs, or you name it. The biggest threat to the enterprise is through the third parties.
So, Dr. Eloise, what's your take on this Google acquisition? How do you, I know there's some kind of synergies with parallels to supply chain, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, so what I really thought that stood out to me in this, because I wasn't tracking Wiz, they weren't on my list. But when I saw that this happened, I was like, "Whoa, that's a big acquisition. I better learn more about this." Um, and it really it's Wiz is does security across clouds. Like if you have multiple clouds, and building the security within those multi clouds. And that really struck a nerve for me. It's like, oh yeah, we are now moving into this multi-cloud era, not just multi-tenant, but multi-cloud. And that's a better way of describing what I had in my last book is really talking about cloud interoperability, and that, I don't know, pick enterprise A has to connect with gigantic supplier, tier one supplier, and we both are exchanging data at the cloud level. How do we secure that? And then on and on and on. And as we think about connecting up all of our end tier suppliers, we are going to be, some people are going to be on Google, some people are going to be on Oracle, some people are going to be on AWS. And so how do we secure that and think about that? So if I do procurement or supply chain technology, I'm actually taking a closer look at this and really thinking about how we secure across clouds, because at a minimum it should influence the RFPs that we use, that we sort of, when we ask cloud vendors or even SaaS vendors, or any IT software vendor, really starting to understand this. So this really sort of sparked a whole series of aha moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this again, I don't know a lot about it. Wiz is not a brand that I was following either, but again, I think the whole play into cybersecurity is a huge focus and priority for all organizations, especially folks working in the IT and even procurement. I mean, procurement is working with, like to your point, lots of third parties, contractors, suppliers, and those are kind of points where if you don't have a good program in place, you open yourself up to a lot of risk.
Yes, and there has been plenty of high-profile examples of that.
And I feel like they continue to happen, right? Like
yeah, exactly.
So regularly, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So another point, not an acquisition. This is just kind of an observation, Dr. Eloise, that you had, and I think it's a very valid one, is the explosion of procurement podcasts. And I would even say in the last 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. It when we started this, and kudos to you for seeing this trend before I did or anybody else did, as far as I can tell. But yeah, it just seems like and I haven't been tracking all of them, but there's got to be at least half a dozen now, maybe more, because I keep seeing them in my feed. And it's like, oh, that's so cool. And yet another podcast. And it's sort of the idea. So our good friends, Natasha,
and Conrad
and Zach, they have their podcast, Proc and Roll. And I was a guest on their show a couple weeks ago. And then Phil Idison of Art of Procurement, he launched a new podcast, and then I realized that he has, or we were exchanging texts, he has 6 podcasts.
Yeah, him and Kelly Barner are what I call content machines.
Yeah.
The amount of content that they produce on a weekly basis is pretty incredible. And it's not crap. They're not just running it through AI. It's actually like high quality, they're spending time really providing meaningful, intentional content. But yeah, I mean, I swear when I saw that they launched another podcast, I was just kind of mind blown. I mean, doing one podcast well is hard enough, but 6 is a lot.
Yeah, I tip my cap to them. And then there's at least 2 other ones. So feel free, anybody that's listening, to put them in the comments, because I feel like we have finally arrived when we now have many, or a whole number of podcasts.
Yeah, and I guess it begs the question, why? Like, why now, right? Why is it so? I think one of the real values of having a podcast is having content that you can distribute ongoing across multiple channels.
Yeah.
When you go and you interact with somebody in person, that's a one-to-one or one to a few, and that's limited to that time and place.
Yeah.
But doing a podcast allows you to have a global reach. It allows you to create video shorts. It allows you to create transcripts. And it really, folks that are trying to produce content at a larger scale, from a marketing and branding and sales perspective, I think it's an interesting avenue to consider. Now, I will say the magic rule in podcasting, according to the research we did when we were thinking about launching ours, is 20. A
Yeah.
lot of podcasts don't make it to 20.
Yeah.
And if you can actually get to your 20th episode, and really have kind of emotion and something in place that's working, you can really see results. But getting there is hard. A lot of people do a couple episodes and quit or decide, it's not the right strategy for them. So keeping up with it, being consistent is harder than it may seem.
Yeah, exactly. And also shout out to Tom Rafferty, who has he's had a supply chain or sort of ESG or sustainability supply chain podcast for a while too. I think he's over 200 episodes. I can't remember exactly but I was on his show back before, just as Russia was massing on the Ukraine border. So that's how far back, and that was like close to the 100th episode. So
which is for us, this is episode 42.
yeah.
So for us to get to 50 is kind of a big deal, and I feel like we'll have to do a special episode yet to be determined.
Yet to be determined, yes. But I will say that this recording this is one of the highlights of my each week, because it's fun and it's able to sort of do a brain dump of like all these things, like the whole Oro thing, and like, wait, this Wiz thing is like, well, I don't know, but maybe because Sarah and I are talking about it, you and I are talking about it, we can process what this means. So I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think, not to get on a tangent on this for all the folks listening who don't really want to be podcasters, care about podcasting, but I think the format that you pick is really important. And I think the interview format is kind of overdone.
Yes.
So the fact that we're just brain dumping and talking about things that matter to us and sharing our perspective, I think is really important. We talked about, if we did a podcast, how would we want it to be structured? And in my opinion, the interview is just, there's so many of them. So if it is something you're thinking about, I would really encourage you to think about the format. You're also seeing what's kind of popular, like Jake Klaus and some of the other podcasters I follow, is they're doing more solo episodes where it's like 10 or 15 minutes and they're just sharing their thoughts or ideas on a topic, or doing more Q&A sessions where they'll have people submit topic questions on social. They'll curate those and then do like a Q&A session, which is another interesting format as well.
Yeah. And the podcast that I've been kind of getting into is Demoted, which is if you've ever seen Corporate Natalie, she's a TikToker influencer that makes fun of corporate life, and she's blown up, and now she's got deals with like Subway and I don't know, whoever else.
She has become an influencer and is it's become quite a profitable career for her.
I mean, she's amazing. She's here in the Bay Area or in San Francisco, and I mean, and I was listening to her podcast. I forget the guy's name that she does it with, and it is very just sort of random topics, and then they sort of group it together with a title. But I think there is, to your point, that sometimes the interviews are like, oh yeah, but like I was just compelled because they were talking about all kinds, like sleep patterns and what they do before bed, and moving in with their boyfriends or girlfriends, or it's just like it is real talk, if you will, and I think there is something valuable about that.
Yeah. Alrighty, is that a wrap for the show?
I think that's a wrap. This was our Cornucopia episode.
Yes, we will be back next Wednesday, and feel free to drop us a note or comment on any of the major channels. YouTube is a good one to put comments, and we will be back next week.